True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery and happy holidays. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
So on December 22nd of 1987, Ronald Gene Simmons began a killing spree that would become the worst massacre in Arkansas history, as well as the deadliest domestic crime in the history of the entire United States. His murderous rampage ended 6 days later, leaving 14 members of his family and 2 former coworkers dead. Join us at the quiet end for the Christmas Vacation Massacre. Gene Simmons was a nightmare from early on in his marriage. He went from controlling but hardworking military man to wife beater to incestuous father, and in the end, he was a merciless mass murderer. So we have a warning in our intro, and we rarely give specific trigger warnings, but this case is just so bad that I think it's necessary to let you know that this episode has discussions about spousal and child abuse, incest, and the murders of several innocent men, women, and small children. So that aside for a second, let's get our beer review so we can huddle up down at the quiet end.
Okay, what I did for this, since this is a kind of a bonus Christmas episode, I picked a Christmas beer, and this is Delirium Noel. It's a Belgian strong dark ale, and it is wonderful. Reddish-orange color, small head, fairly still, not a lot of bubbles. Nice fruity aroma, mostly raisin, some spice, fruity taste, a spiciness, a little hint of licorice at the end. Very nice beer, very easy to drink. Be careful, because it's 10% alcohol by volume.
It's 10%. It's kind of spicy and different, but I just love it. I think it's a great beer for this season. So let's open it up.
Okay. Oh, we got a gusher here.
Oh, that's good for a celebration. Look, the dog will just lick up the beer that falls on the floor. All right. Got quite a head on it there.
That it does.
I wonder if I shook it when I brought it in from the garage
fridge. I should have warned you. We've had a couple other ones that have done the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's just this particular 4-pack.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to find is another nice thing about this beer this time of year. Seems like you can find it in many places.
Oh, yeah. I mean, our local place that we go to, it's a pretty good selection, but not that widespread. They have plenty of this beer.
Mm-hmm. So good.
So.
All right. So let's go on down to the quiet end and have a talk.
Let's do that.
It's kind of a long, hard talk, but Christmassy nonetheless.
Well, this is a horrible story.
God, isn't it? And I can't believe I'd never heard of it until recently.
But we'll consider this Christmas warning.
I warned people.
Okay.
But, we cover a lot of horrible shit, so it's not, that much worse. It's just the amount of people is shocking, right?
The amount of people in the length of time.
Yeah, and the young people, which is always heartbreaking.
Very.
Yeah. Okay, so start us off here, Dickie.
Ronald Gene Simmons was born in 1940 in Chicago, Illinois. His mother, Loretta, had married his father, William, in 1934. Within a month of their marriage, Loretta got pregnant, and she gave birth to her first child, who was a son and who was named Robert. This was in 1935. Loretta stayed with William Simmons until she divorced him a year later and returned to college where she graduated in 1937. The divorce was shocking. It was a pretty rare occurrence at that time. It was even more shocking that 2 years later, Loretta remarried William. It wasn't easy being a single mother during the depressed economy. So that is at least part of her reasoning for taking William back. Ronald Gene Simmons was then born in 1940, followed by his little sister Nancy in 1942.
Right, so that's really interesting for a woman in that time period to go back to college and get a divorce. Interesting.
Yeah, 2 things that weren't done that commonly by women.
Right, exactly. And it makes me think maybe things weren't great with William. We don't have a lot of details on why, but just didn't seem like the best match for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, she took him back.
She did, but I think it may have been more of a financial decision. But we don't know. She did have other children, so. Less than a year after the youngest, Nancy's birth, William Simmons dropped dead from a stroke while on the job, so that was that. Didn't last very long.
No.
Then, at age 34, Loretta was a widow and a mother of 3. So she took a job doing clerical work with the War Department, and that's where she met William Davenport Griffin, a civil engineer. And in 1943, Loretta married Griffin. So Griffin did seem like a better match for Loretta than her first husband had been. He was a painter, so he had like an artistic side, because when I say painter, I mean paintings, not houses.
Okay, I was going to ask you.
Yeah, kind of a well-educated guy. And Dad Griffin, as Jean would call him, was stable, sober, and affectionate.
So that sounds like those things were sort of lacking in her marriage with her previous husband?
Well, it's implied in that statement, I would say.
I would think.
So Loretta and Griffin had a son together, Peter, in 1945. And Loretta was pregnant with twins less than a year after that. So busy girl. But unfortunately, the twin boys were born prematurely and both died within hours of being born. As there wasn't a lot they did for preemies back then, in the 40s. At least not anything like there is today.
Oh, for sure. If they'd gotten close to term, maybe there would be a better outcome. But if they were born anywhere more than 3 weeks early, they probably would not have survived.
Well, that's interesting because Gene himself was born early. So it seemed to be a thing.
Yeah, but there was very little that could be done or was done for preemies back in the day.
Well, yeah, if their lungs weren't mature, they didn't have the surfactant to give them, for one thing.
Right. So it would be survival of the fittest for those preemies.
Yeah, kind of hard scrabble, survive whether you're strong enough or not.
Yep.
So after the death of the twins, the Army Corps of Engineers transferred Griffin to Little Rock, Arkansas, and the family settled about 70 miles outside of Little Rock. That was near the small town of Hector. Their home was rural and surrounded by the Ozark forests. So Gene was just beginning the 2nd grade when they moved. To him and his half-brother Pete, this was their home. Griffin was away for 4 nights a week, leaving Loretta to raise the children alone. As a middle child, though, Gene resented his siblings and he really missed having his mother's attention, because he'd had it pretty much to himself for a while when she first married Dad Griffin. So Gene was a difficult child. He had tantrums to try and get her attention. But for Gene, he would remember his years there as the best time of his life. So in 1950, Dad Griffin moved the family to Little Rock, where they lived in the suburb of Landmark. But Gene had very few friends his own age. After his older brother Robert left home to join the Navy in 1952, Gene became a real bully to his little brother Pete. He would threaten Pete, pinching and slapping him when no one else was around, and Pete would later recall how Gene always had to be right and in charge of everything. He would often refuse to do what his mother told him, screaming and stomping his feet. Dad Griffin, who was really a mild-mannered man, resorted to spanking Gene, but it just didn't work. In 1953, they enrolled Gene in a boarding school for problem boys. And when Gene returned after less than a year in the boarding school, he did make some efforts to be better, but he was soon back to his old ways and was sent back to the boarding school.
So you've got a kid who, from a very early age, had a lot of behavior issues.
Yes. Yep. That's hard. Yep. And I imagine it was really hard in the 40s and 50s.
I'm sure.
No medications.
No.
Yeah.
In 1956, Gene rejoined his family, but he found fault with everything. He refused to study, he made no friends, and would spend hours by himself in his room. Now, both Dad Griffin and Loretta had health issues, so they moved the family to Albuquerque, New Mexico, to help with their asthma and shortness of breath. Their respiratory symptoms turned Gene vehemently against smoking. That became a lifelong issue, resulting in a habit of clearing his throat and putting up no smoking signs in his home.
Yes, he was very anti-smoking.
So I take it that the respiratory issues with his parents was because they were smokers?
I would guess that, although I haven't read that specifically. But I would guess that was an issue. Anyway, he hated smoking. So he's kind of ahead of his time in that respect, if nothing else. So by the time he was 17, Gene was dreaming of returning to the Ozarks and having a big family of his own. He would really kind of harp on how great Arkansas was whenever he was complaining about any place else. Then his mother was diagnosed with cervical cancer, and she couldn't do much to support him or his siblings. Pete and Nancy then gravitated to Dad Griffin during this time, but Gene always just felt left out and tried to get more attention. Be it negative or positive, he would just do whatever to get attention. So still a troubled young man. Gene also looked for attention and approval outside of the home, and he was often humiliated. In 1957, when he was 17, he got a job at a local golf club as a busboy and a waiter. And at first he seemed happier, and the whole family was happy to see him earning some money and gaining some independence. But then Gene came home from work one night covered in trash, like orange peels, bones, coffee grounds, and grease, trash from, like, the restaurant kitchen. But he would never tell anyone what had happened, and he would never return to the golf club, not once, not even to pick up his last check. So something happened there that really pissed him off, and it shows you how stubborn and what a temper he had. And he was one of these guys that seemed to have trouble getting along with other people at jobs, and I guess that's why the military kind of worked for him for a while anyway.
Well, it's certainly more regimented.
Yeah, I think that kind of helped him out for a few years.
He must have really hated that place.
Yes. Well, he was humiliated, and once he was mad about something, he would not come around. So that September, with Dad Griffin and Loretta's permission, probably enthusiastic permission because he was kind of a problem, Gene enlisted in the U.S. Navy.
Yeah, and he did well in the service early on, but continued to have his socially awkward behaviors. He did develop a liking for beer drinking, but had no drinking buddies. He became a regular at USO dances, and that's where he met his future wife, Becky. Gene told Becky that he was from Arkansas and planned to return there someday to buy back his family home. He told her she was beautiful, and she told him that she loved children.
And that was important. From a young age, he wanted a big family.
Now, Becky came from New Mexico, and she was the youngest of 5 children, and until the 8th grade, she had lived in a small town. She grew up on a farm, but she never did farm work. She did the household chores. So through the winter and spring of 1959 into 1960, Gene and Becky fell in love. Gene really needed to be the center of her world, and Becky held Gene in such high regard because she'd never had the kind of attention that Gene had given her. She saw Gene's controlling behavior as strength and thought that his insistence on always being in charge was a sign of love.
Oh, Becky. Big mistake. Yeah. Big mistake. So Becky married Gene in 1960, and Loretta and Dad Griffin liked her, and they liked the way that Gene was around her. Then Becky gave birth to their first child, little Gene, less than a year after they got married. Gene left the Navy for civilian life later that year and took a job at the Bank of America in San Francisco. His job was to verify deposits from armored cars. So then he fantasized about becoming a banker, and he enrolled in college. But he just didn't fit in either place, so again, he had trouble getting along with others. So Gene missed the Navy, and though he didn't want to be away from Becky, he was going back, at least into the military. In January of 1963, he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, where he would stay for 16 years. By the time he went to Vietnam, where he would be for 13 months, Becky was pregnant again. Gene controlled all of the money and gave her a small allowance. Then he began to berate her in public, collecting her grammar and scolding her for not being frugal enough with the money that he gave her. So it wasn't unusual for her to have to beg Gene for money just to feed their kids. Also, Gene refused to allow for any birth control, and Becky would continue to have children up until the time her doctor insisted that she have a tubal ligation. In 1966, Gene re-enlisted. He did office work, advancing his career as an administrative specialist. Then he bought a 20-foot travel trailer, towed it to a piece of land near Becky's family in Colorado, and parked it in the pasture there. This was in 1967, and during the next year, Gene was in Vietnam, and Becky was in that trailer with the children. Gene had removed the wheels and put it on blocks, so no one could drive it while he was gone. And Becky didn't have a driver's license anyway. He didn't want her to have one. He continued to control their money, even from Saigon, making all of their monthly payments by mail. So this was a horrible time for Becky. She was lost and depressed while Gene was gone. But instead of seeing it correctly, she saw it as missing Gene, like that's what she needed. She was isolated and cramped in this tiny trailer with 3 children. By then they had little Gene, Sheila, and Billy. Sheila, who was 2 years old at this time, missed her father the most, because she would forever be Gene's favorite child, and unfortunately Gene would develop some very inappropriate feelings for her, and he would end up acting on those.
In the wintertime, the trailer they lived in got buried in snow, and Becky and the kids had to move into her sister's house. Then in May of 1968, Becky moved back into the trailer while Gene was taking his R&R in Australia. Gene arrived back in the United States in July of that year. He put the wheels back on the trailer and drove his family to California. He set up the trailer at a mobile home park in Vacaville. Then he began his job in San Francisco.
Yeah, but Gene really hated San Francisco in the late 1960s. He hated hippies and the summer of love and the whole counterculture. Then he became more interested in guns and bought himself 2. He went to the firing range and practiced shooting, and he became a very accurate shot. Little Gene and Sheila went to school, and that left just Billy at home with his mom. Becky did make friends with other women in the trailer park, but none of them were friendly with Gene. Gene didn't like other people in his house, so Becky never had anyone over when he was there, and that was something that would continue through their whole life together.
Gene ended up commuting from Vacaville and hated it, but he couldn't afford housing in San Francisco. There weren't any trailer parks near the city that would accept children, and there was no base housing. Then Gene got a notice that he had to hook up oil or natural gas to his trailer, or he needed to pay another $50 a month. So Gene then decided that his job and his housing were not working out, so he filed a request for transfer. He was transferred and moved to base housing in 1969. Then in 1973, he got transferred to England. And for Becky and the children, England ended up being their last good place to live.
So it's interesting to me how he was so angry and wouldn't put up with people telling him what to do when he was a military person. But as soon as something happened he didn't like, oh, you need to hook up your trailer to natural gas and pay another $50 a month, he's just like, fuck you, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
So we've met these kind of people. I hate to say it.
We have.
Yeah, it's not a good type of personality to have. So Becky and Gene had a second daughter, Loretta, in 1970, and she would be the most independent of their children, really smart, beautiful, and popular. But the oppression of the Simmons household was evident in the other children. Little Gene and Sheila were very unsure of themselves and got poor grades. He and Becky had another son, Eddie, in 1973, but by the winter of 1974, Gene was beating Becky on a regular basis. Now it's believed he probably beat her before, but at this point, he doesn't even care who knows about it. And over the years, Gene's focus became his eldest daughter, Sheila. He blamed Becky for the violence that he did to her, and he saw her as a threat to his authority. And he saw Becky as a threat to his authority. Gene drove Sheila to and from school while the other kids were left to take the bus. And Becky was too trusting to realize that Gene definitely had sexual feelings for their oldest daughter. He would hold her on his knee and run his hand inside her shorts when he tucked in her shirt. And he took pictures of all the children in the bath, but he kept the ones of Sheila in an envelope in his dresser drawer. He called her things like Ladybug and My Little Princess. Pretty icky.
Oh, total icky. In 1975, Gene received his orders to report to the SAMSO Observatory in Cloudcroft, New Mexico. He had a nest egg of nearly $2,000 and had several $100s in savings bonds. Despite being forewarned that off-base housing was scarce in Alamogordo and Cloudcroft, Gene searched the canyons around Cloudcroft and the real estate pages of the newspapers. With his family arriving there in late May, he put down a deposit on a house at 901 Cedar in Alamogordo, which turned out to be the only rental available that he could find. He always saw this as a temporary home.
Well, yeah, he always had that dream that he was going to go back to Arkansas.
That's right. Gene went back to get his family, and they flew to San Francisco. Gene rented a car there, took the family on a tour of the California coast. They spent the night in Anaheim and went to Disneyland. The next day they went to SeaWorld in San Diego, and then they headed to New Mexico.
So Gene really was happy to be reunited with his family. The Air Force had delivered the family's clothing, furniture, and other household items to their new home, and then Gene took a couple of weeks off to help set up house, and an additional week to take the kids to visit Becky's mother. Gene liked having Sheila sitting beside him as they made the drive. Becky rode in the back with the other children, and Gene moved Sheila onto the console between the front seats and held his arm around her. Becky's mother noticed this sitting arrangement when they arrived at her house, and she came out to hug the kids, but she definitely had her eyes on Gene, who waited in the car with Sheila until the other children had gone inside. So possibly touching her and doing things is what I'm thinking here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Gene helped Sheila out through his door, and with the van between them and his wife and mother-in-law, he ran his hand across Sheila's belly and tucked in her shirt, and I guess he did that often. So later, when they were alone, Becky's mother asked Becky why she hadn't been sitting up front with her husband. She wanted to know why Gene had Sheila up there with him. If it couldn't be Becky, she said, it should have been little Gene. It just didn't look right. Becky's half-sister Edith despised Gene, and she would never forget how Gene had left Becky and the children isolated and with nothing while he was in Vietnam, and then went on a little vacation to Australia.
Yeah, so they snowed in.
Yeah. She thought that Gene treated Becky like a slave and was an overbearing father. So I think Edith has a good point here. But Becky defended Gene, and she would defend him for many, many years.
Yeah, and when Becky told Gene about this, Gene told her, "Don't listen to your bitch sister." But however he felt about Edith, Gene did enjoy being on the ranch. There were horses, chickens, cattle, and dogs. This trip, combined with his dissatisfaction with their new rental in Alamogordo, strengthened his resolve to find a more rural place in the mountains for his family. He believed that careful planning in New Mexico would allow him to buy a place that would grow in value so that he could finance his long-term dream of buying property back in Arkansas.
Yeah, so again, Gene pored over the real estate ads and the for sale notices on the billboards of grocery stores and laundromats. He was looking for the best place he could possibly afford, one that would have potential. And in his mind, potential was like building up some kind of, almost like a commune of his family, like a homestead away from everyone else, where they would basically be isolated.
Yeah, but he was hoping to find a nice enough place that he could sell it at a good profit to get his property back in Arkansas.
Exactly. Now, his mother had just recently died at this point, and he had put aside $15,000 from her life insurance benefits, which was quite a bit of money back then. I mean, it's a good amount now, but back then, that's a good chunk of money. So he found the place on Wills Canyon, 11 miles southeast of Cloudcroft. So this was a clapboard house that had 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. It was on 3 acres and had 2 outbuildings, and the asking price was one that he could afford. So he was really eager to move and believed he'd really gotten a bargain. He and Becky signed a purchase agreement, and he made plans to do renovations and plant gardens and become like this self-sufficient family. So a big part of Gene's stated motive for this move was his concern for his children. He believed that a simple, isolated life would give them a more wholesome upbringing than they would get in cities or suburbs. Becky was pregnant at this time with their 6th child, Mary Ann Michelle, who would be born that December 17th. So he knew his family needed room to grow, and Cloudcroft had one of the best schools in the state.
So one of the other reasons, obviously, for buying this house, or this whatever house, is it's isolated.
Isolated was big, yes. He wanted to be isolated.
Yeah, because he doesn't want people knowing or intimating what was going on at his house.
No, not at all.
So a perfect place to be.
Yeah, I mean, it could have revolved around incest in many ways, if that's what you're leading to.
Well, that and other things. I mean, he can beat his wife.
Right.
He can beat on the other kids. He can
completely control them.
He can do all sorts of things.
Yes, exactly.
Without it being known.
Right, yeah. I'm really surprised that they didn't homeschool the kids.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Now, Gene treated his children as his slaves, as well as his largest source of love and affirmation. So they weren't seen as individuals, but only as extensions of himself. He would use them as the laborer to try and transform the new property into what he envisioned as their homestead. Little Gene was 15 years old at this time, and he carried the heaviest weight of his father's demands. Gene would leave little Gene a list of tasks and inevitably find fault in every single thing that the boy did. Of course, there was a lot to be done on this property before the cold winter hit, so Gene organized the children into work crews. He had them out clearing rocks, mixing cement, and carrying concrete blocks to rebuild a retaining wall at the back of the house. And the projects multiplied, as did each child's list of weekly chores. So they'd start doing this when they were like just 3-4 years old. They'd be out there working for hours.
Yep.
The children were so tired from working that they would often fall asleep in school. Their only contact outside of the family property was at school. They could go to like the laundromat or the grocery store with their mother, but that's about it. So none of them were really doing very well academically.
Or socially.
No, not at all. Although, at school, the kids seemed pretty normal. They weren't troubled kids like Gene had been. They'd come home on the bus immediately after school and then work sometimes until dark or sometimes even past dark, holding flashlights. So this was miserable, but to Gene, things were just going fine. It wasn't Arkansas, but it was a place in the woods, and he was happy when he learned that yet another child was on the way. So over a short amount of time, it became obvious that his ambitions for the new home were way beyond their energy or their financial limits. The family celebrated Christmas 1976, but all of the good things were outweighed by anxiety over the unpaid bills and the closing of the location where Gene was assigned for his work. So it was becoming inevitable that his job would be ending there and another transfer was looming. Still, Gene continued to make the improvements to the property, knowing that the military was really all that he ever knew.
And Gene refused to have a telephone, both because of the expense and for his belief that having a phone would distract and corrupt his wife and children. So he got a CB radio. With this, he didn't have to respond to any calls, and he could monitor all communications by Becky and the children. Now, in reality, there was no amount of work that was going to turn the Simmons home into anything more than a clapboard mess on dirt covered in rocky land. But he increased his efforts and he worked the children harder.
Yeah, Gene was soon faced with retirement from the Air Force, so he took out a second mortgage on the property to pay some bills. On the application, he claimed a net worth of $20,000 and his monthly Air Force income of over $1,500. But he didn't mention his impending retirement, which was going to cut his income in half. So as his retirement approached, Gene became more erratic and more abusive. He was hitting Becky in front of the children. He'd been hiding it for years, but now that didn't matter. Becky had a tubal ligation, and Gene showed less interest in her. Unfortunately, he turned his sexual desires now toward his oldest daughter, Sheila. He didn't think that Becky was really a woman anymore because she couldn't give him children. So he's a charmer. What a guy.
What a guy.
What a guy.
So by 1978, Becky and Gene would have 7 children. His attention focused on Sheila to the point of disturbing Becky and the other children. Becky was in denial, living in fear, and just feeling helpless and hopeless.
She was in a horrible position, and it's easy for me to pass judgment on her for letting that happen to her daughter. But I can, on the other side of things, see that she was a victim as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
However much Gene feared being retired, it was terrifying for Becky and the kids.
Can you imagine?
Well, once he's retired, he's home all day.
Well, exactly. And
every day.
Yes. And that was the only peace they really had.
Yeah, but now they don't have that.
No, and then he was working constantly on the property and working the children to tears. So the place was a clutter of scrounged up building materials, poorly built outbuildings, and half-finished projects. These children lived in strict isolation under the abusive yoke of their father. Becky and the children seemed friendly, and they would wave whenever someone drove by their house, because they were always outside working. But if Gene was with them, they'd keep their heads down and keep working.
Oh, yeah, you better not be waving at people.
So there was absolute control over everyone in that house. Then in the new year, Gene cut Becky's food allowance, which was already bare bones. They lived on cornflakes, beans, and processed cheese. He put the children on the free lunch program, and that's a good thing because that became their best meal of the day.
In 1980, Sheila was becoming a young woman. She was shy and a pretty average student. She didn't work as hard as the other Simmons children. She was his favorite, his princess. She wasn't involved in any sports or school activities. She wasn't allowed to date or have a boyfriend. At age 16, she had developed hips and breasts, and Gene became more and more obsessed with her and more abusive toward Becky.
Yeah, Becky began to sleep with the younger girls. Sheila was suffering from isolation from her mother as Gene began to replace Becky with Sheila. Loretta May, 7 years younger than Sheila and very bright, resented both Sheila and her father. Little Gene moved out of the house as soon as he could and was able to go off to college. As the house fell into deeper chaos with clutter scattered all over the yard, money was very scarce. But Gene had decided to spend a year and a half working full-time on the property and not even looking for a job. So they're living off that retirement from the Air Force, which was like $700-800
per month.
Yes.
For a family of
9.
2 adults and 7 kids.
Yep. But by this time, Gene was flagrantly doting on Sheila and had convinced himself that his sexual desire for his oldest daughter was actually a duty of his to protect her from sex with anyone else. Now Becky was just repulsive to him. Having convinced himself that it was his obligation to teach Sheila about sex, he was able to justify his plans to commit incest. He was sick by the thought of anyone else having sex with Sheila, and then he thought that she'd be exposed to shame. So in his sick mind, he saw no alternative but to introduce his daughter to sex in order to protect her from it. Whatever that means, I don't know.
Well, he's got to have a reason for being in an incestuous relationship.
You're right.
So could have been something else, but he had to figure out something to justify, at least in his mind, that this was okay to do.
Oh, absolutely. And in his mind, he was a great father.
Right.
Yeah.
So once he had done this, once he had justified the incest to himself, Gene was convinced that he had a higher level of understanding. He used Sheila's forced hobby of coin collecting as an excuse to take her to California for a coin show. Now, Sheila really didn't care about coins, but Gene convinced her that it was an interest that they shared. Becky couldn't understand how Gene would be able to justify the expense of this trip, but she didn't dare argue with him. And at the same time, there would also be some relief in having him gone, so they'd have a brief respite from the Gene.
Yeah, I think, she was kind of torn because it was good for her and the other kids to have him gone, but at the same time, she knew that her daughter was like a lamb to the slaughter.
Yeah.
So it's a horrible position.
It's tough to reconcile.
Absolutely. When they returned from the trip, Becky really noticed more leering affection that Gene was showing for Sheila. She knew that something was really wrong. He increased the attention he showed his oldest daughter, and he went out and bought her clothes like outfits, and nothing for the other kids. Every afternoon, Gene would pick her up at school and leave the other kids standing at the bus stop. When Gene and Sheila would return home, Sheila would be snuggled up in the crook of his arm. Then Gene began following Sheila everywhere with a Polaroid camera, and he'd keep pictures of her in his dresser. So twice that September, Gene had sex with Sheila in his car. He had sex with her the first time in a motel room on their trip to California. Each time Sheila worked up the nerve to tell her father it didn't feel right, he would back off for a while. So that winter the incest stopped for a couple of months. But then in March, Sheila knew that she was pregnant. She tried to bury her memories of the incest, and her grades actually improved for a time. But Gene made no effort to hide his lust and infatuation for his daughter. When Becky slept with Sheila's little sisters, Gene took Sheila into his room and he'd tell her how much he loved her and how their sexual relationship was protecting her and her mother. So he's telling her she really needs to have sex with him for her mother's sake. This is so twisted and gross.
Yes, it is. So Sheila hadn't seen a doctor yet to confirm her pregnancy before she told Gene about it. Gene told Becky and Billy, confirming Becky's worst fears. Amazingly, Gene actually seemed to take pleasure in telling his wife on the day of Sheila's senior prom.
This is so ghastly. Oh.
Sheila didn't have a date for the prom, didn't want to go, but Gene had insisted. He bought her a dress and took photographs of her. He told them all that a new baby was always a joy.
Wow.
Gene also told the family that nobody needed to know who the baby's father was, and that they would raise the child like any of their others. Billy was confused and embarrassed. Becky remained in bed for days on end.
Well, Becky was devastated, and I guess she felt powerless. And I think her power here was limited. Because
absolutely.
Yeah. You want to say, well, take your kids and leave, but it really wasn't that easy. She had so many kids and not much support. At least she wasn't aware of how much support she could get from her family. So what Gene did is he gave Sheila pamphlets on how bad abortion and adoption are. They would keep the child and he wouldn't hear of anything else. Seeing a woman pregnant with his child really thrilled him and didn't seem to bother him at all that this was his daughter. He took her to the doctor and bought books on baby names and breastfeeding. And he warned Becky and the other children that he could be arrested if anyone found out. And then he told Becky she could lose custody of all of the children. So Becky did tell little Gene what had happened because he was an adult by now. And he was appalled. So he confided in a friend who told him to contact the New Mexico Department of Human Services. And in April, little Gene called social services. And by then, the rumors about Sheila and her father were already spreading.
The district attorney, Stephen Sanders, was notified. Then a caseworker went to Cloudcroft to investigate. She spoke with the high school principal, who confirmed that he too had heard the rumors. The caseworker also spoke with Sheila at school, and Sheila admitted that she was pregnant with her father's child. She told the worker about the trip to California in September.
Yeah, the caseworker did go out to the Simmons house and confront Gene with what Sheila had told her. But, Gene didn't deny it. He said that there were no problems in the family and that the incest was over with now. He said that he had to have sex with her to teach her about sex, and he saw that as his duty as a father. Now, actually, this wasn't the worst case that this caseworker had ever encountered.
Okay.
Yeah, scary. But Gene's arrogance and his control of his family was scary and moved her to act very quickly. She made a verbal report the same day that she spoke to Simmons. But instead of getting immediate legal action, they developed a program of psychological counseling which included Becky, Sheila, and the younger children. So here's where they really lost me because I don't understand why that man wasn't removed from that home immediately.
I don't either. You've got the specialist involved. He admitted the incest.
Yes. And there are other daughters at home.
So we're going to develop a program of psychological counseling. Wonderful.
Yeah, this was a while ago, but still, it's really terrible.
Yeah, well, Gene felt confident that he could work the system. At the same time, he wasn't oblivious to the legal implications. And he contacted a law firm pleading indigency. That's when he learned that any admissions he'd made in counseling could be used against him in court.
Yeah, not good, because he wasn't denying things.
Right. So at least something finally was getting going. The caseworker filed to remove Sheila, Loretta, and Marianne from the home, and they put Gene on pre-prosecution probation.
Yeah, now poor Sheila, her pregnancy couldn't be concealed anymore, so she stopped going to school. She gave birth in June at the same hospital where her little sister had just been born 2 years earlier, and Sheila named her daughter Sylvia Gale. Then Gene took out another bank loan, taking a lien against his property, and spent the next week planning their escape. On August 6th, he rented a house in the tiny community of Ward, Arkansas, leaving little Gene to see to the sale of the New Mexico property. When the authorities arrived at the Simmons home on August 10th, the place was abandoned. So this was late 1981, the Simmons family moved to Ward, and 2 years later, they moved to Pope County, Arkansas, living on a 13-acre plot of land that Gene called Mockingbird Hill. So this home was constructed of 2 older model mobile homes, joined to form one large home surrounded by a makeshift fence that was as high as 10 feet in some places. And they had no phone and no indoor plumbing. Once in Arkansas, Simmons worked a number of low-paying jobs in Pope County. He quit a job as an account receivables clerk at Woodline Motor Freight after multiple reports of inappropriate sexual advances against coworkers. He then worked at the Sinclair Mini Mart for about a year and a half before he would quit on December 18, 1987.
Over the time in Arkansas, Sheila attended business college and began to break away from her father. She was finding new friends and increasingly becoming more confident. She did well with her studies and met a young man named Dennis McNulty, and she was held back emotionally by her shame from the incest. And for quite some time, Gene's arrogance would not allow him to accept that Sheila was developing a healthy relationship with someone else. He raped Sheila again before she was strong enough to keep him away, and she became pregnant by him for a second time. Now, Gene was able to take Sheila to a doctor and get her an abortion without Becky finding out.
Now this is something because Gene was totally against abortion. That's killing babies, he said.
Yeah.
But then, when it applies to him, it's a different story.
Well,
not surprising.
He's kind of smart enough to know that he sort of got away with it once, but he wasn't going to get away with it a second time.
Yeah, but that means he really had no true beliefs about abortion.
Of course he didn't.
He's just judging other people and doing whatever suited him.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this abortion was a real turning point for Sheila. She was falling in love with Dennis, and he was very kind with her. And she told Dennis about what her father had done, and then she never had sex with Gene again. But, Gene tried. He tried to win her back. He even cried about how much he loved her and needed her. But Dennis was very supportive of Sheila, and she was able to protect herself. Of course, this left Gene angry and resentful. His moods became more volatile, and Becky was afraid of him. Well, the whole family was afraid of him. Then Sheila left home and married Dennis, but Gene refused to attend their wedding or pay for anything. Loretta, her younger sister, was a victim of Gene's angry outbursts. She was the smart and outspoken one, and he hated her for that. Gene spent his time when he wasn't working alone in his room, and Becky spent a lot of her time in another bedroom. So this is such a dysfunctional household. The poor children who were still living at home were left to communicate with their parents by passing notes under the doors, and then just hoping maybe they'd answer.
How's that?
It's such a mess.
So you wonder, who's cooking meals? Who's preparing meals? Are they all on their own?
Well, they're pretty much on their own because Becky was so depressed.
Yeah. So by December of 1987, the people left living in the Simmons home were down to 7. There was Gene, Becky, Loretta, who was 17, Eddie was 14, Marianne, 11, Rebecca, 8, and there's a 3-year-old granddaughter, Barbara. Billy married a woman named Renata, and they had a child named Trey. Little Gene was in his mid-20s, living on his own. Sheila, as we said, was married to Dennis. They had 7-year-old Sylvia and a 1-year-old son named Michael.
So that winter, Gene Simmons made plans to kill his family and other people he believed had somehow wronged him. On December 1st, Sheila called little Gene, who now lived in San Antonio, and talked to him for about a half an hour. He agreed that sometime over the next Christmas holiday, they had to help their mother get away from their father. So they're starting to think he's really getting dangerous. Sheila and Dennis knew that going to the house would be seen as a challenge to Gene, and it might make getting Becky to leave more difficult. Becky had written letters to them asking them to be careful. Now, this wasn't easy because Becky was not allowed to go anywhere, and she wasn't allowed to have postage stamps. So if she wanted to write a letter to anyone, Gene was allowed to read it, and then he would decide if it was worth a postage stamp to send it for her. So she'd worked out something with little Gene that had helped her get some letters out that her husband didn't know about. So in an effort to keep Gene on a more even keel, they called him at work, this is Sheila and Dennis, and asked him if he and Becky would mind keeping Sylvia Gale one day while Sheila and Dennis went to a going-away party for one of Dennis's friends. So Gene agreed to this, and they dropped off Sylvia on December 5th. They left their son, 1-year-old Michael, with Dennis's parents. Then Gene surprised them by inviting them to come back and spend the night to avoid a long drive home in the dark. So when they got there, Gene seemed genuinely happy to see Sylvia. Now remember, that's his biological daughter.
That's right.
That weekend went by without any issues, but then on Sunday morning, Gene didn't come out of his room before Dennis and Sheila had to leave. When they were heading out to their car, he leaned out of his doorway and called out, "Oh, you're leaving. Goodbye." So 2 days after that, on December 8th, Gene rented a 1987 Ford and drove to see where Sheila worked and to see her new mobile home in a wooded development that was outside of town. He wanted to learn the ways in and out of town, and Dennis's mother did see him going into a pharmacy that day. She hadn't been sure it was him until he left, and she wouldn't mention this at all until police and reporters asked her questions, and that would be at the end of December.
On Friday, December 18th, Gene picked up his paycheck from the mini-mart before noon, telling them that he would return for his 1 o'clock shift. But then shortly before 1, he called the store and quit. 17-year-old Loretta was helpful to her mother that weekend. She is sweet with the younger kids and took care of little Barbara. Eddie, 14 then, loved being outdoors. He was hoping for warm weather over Christmas so that he and Dennis or Billy or little Gene could fish together. As the only boy left living at home, he missed his brothers and his brother-in-law. Marianne and Rebecca Lynn, 11 and 8 years of age, were excited about Christmas and getting some presents.
So on Monday, little Gene arrived alone, planning to stay through Christmas. Then he would take his daughter Barbara back to Texas for New Year's with his wife Wilma. Gene barely slept at all on Monday night. After dawn, he heard Becky getting dressed in the bathroom across the hall. He heard Loretta and Eddie and the little girls having breakfast and leaving for the bus to school. Then he heard Becky go back to bed, where she slept with Barbara and Rebecca Lynn. Then he got up, dressed, and put his pistol in his waistband. So that morning was December 22nd. Gene killed his wife Becky and his oldest son, little Gene, by bludgeoning them with a crowbar and then shooting them with his .22 caliber pistol. Then he killed his 3-year-old granddaughter Barbara by strangulation. He put their bodies into one of the cesspits that he had forced his children to dig months earlier. Then he waited for his 4 other children to arrive home from school on the bus. So like most school children, the school day for Loretta, Marianne, Rebecca Lynn, and Eddie was a day of fun and excitement for the upcoming holiday. They exchanged cards with their friends and had a lot of free time. So even 17-year-old Loretta was feeling bubbly about the holiday. Christmas had really always been the best season for the Simmons family. It had been years since they were really happy, but they did have the visits of their older siblings and their children to look forward to. Little Gene had arrived that day, and Sheila and Billy and their families were due to arrive on December 26th. So Loretta was looking forward to all of that. There are no reliable witnesses to what happened when the children arrived at home, because Gene is the only one that really knows. But the way we're about to tell it is what was put together by crime scene experts and journalists based on the crime scene and what we know about Gene Simmons and the children. So halfway up the steep dirt driveway to their ramshackle home, the children likely saw their father waiting for them with a smile on his face. And this would have been surprising because Gene never came out to greet his children, and he rarely smiled at them. Loretta, who was eager to see 3-year-old Barbara, walked ahead as Gene talked to the others. Eddie had an unopened present from his class Christmas party, and he pulled it from his backpack to show his father, planning to put it under the tree to open on Christmas morning.
Now, Gene's plans hadn't gone as well as he had expected that day. When he killed his first victims, the noise of the gunshots in the trailer were way louder than he had expected. Now, he had rehearsed this day for months, but he was also prepared with alternative methods. So he stopped the children before going inside, and he told them They had Christmas surprises for them. He wanted to give them to them one at a time. So Gene told the 3 younger children to wait in the old Chevy station wagon and listen to Christmas carols on the radio. Well, he took Loretta inside first. He said he would come back for each of them, one by one.
Yeah, and I think he took Loretta first because she would be the one to be the most suspicious and to be able to fight the most.
Yeah, the oldest.
Yes.
So Loretta was first. Gene put his arm around her shoulder and led her inside. She would have smelled the wine and beer on his breath, and she would not have liked that. In fact, she had said before that she hoped that the booze would kill him. So she asked what the surprise was, and probably asked where Barbara was. Inside there would be no sign of her mother, little Jean, or Barbara. But little Jean's truck was parked outside, so he had to be somewhere around there. She probably would be concerned when her father led her to his bedroom. It was his sick little sanctuary, where he kept his wine and his special foods.
Yeah, and by special foods, it was like onions and sardines. And he actually ate quite well compared to what his family was allowed to eat.
Well, sure.
And we don't know if Jean had sexually molested Loretta before either. There was a story by a friend of hers where she had spent the night there when Loretta was a teenager, and Loretta had 3 deadbolts on her bedroom door. So to me, that's a sign that he was probably going after her.
Yeah, at least trying to.
Right.
Yeah.
But Gene did take Loretta into his room and punched her in the face. Then he took a yellow and white braided nylon fish stringer from his jacket pocket and wrapped it around Loretta's neck, strangling her. This was incredibly violent, and he pushed her to the floor, putting his knee into her chest and pulling the garrote into her neck. And leaving nothing to chance, he put her head into a large plastic trash barrel full of water and held her there until he was sure she was dead. The other 3 children were killed in the same way, one at a time, and their bodies were all dumped in the same cesspit. And he would cover the cesspit with barbed wire to keep animals out of it.
Sheesh.
Yeah, something he had learned in Vietnam, I guess.
So when he was done, Gene rested for a while, watching TV and drinking from a bottle of wine. He didn't bother to clean up the blood on the floors and walls. He was likely wallowing in his own self-pity, reliving his memories of his oldest daughter, Sheila. In his mind, this was all her fault. He had loved her, and she had destroyed him. He told her before that he would see her in hell.
Yeah, so on December 23rd, Gene
That's the next day.
Yeah, the very next day, Gene went into town. He picked up some packages that Becky had ordered from Sears. Then he went to the liquor store and bought more beer and wine. He drank from the wine bottle as he drove back home. So then on Christmas Day, Dennis didn't say anything to Sheila about their trip that they would be taking the next day to see her parents and to try and get her mother to leave her father. So they had been waiting for a call from little Gene, who'd gone to the house on Monday, December 22nd, but they hadn't heard from him. And we know why. He was killed that day.
He was dead.
Dennis was trying to keep Sheila from worrying. Her brother Billy and his wife Renata and their little boy Trey were planning to meet them at her parents' house on the 26th. So on the morning of the 26th, Dennis put gas in the car and bought some snacks for the drive. Then he called Billy, but there was no answer. He and his wife Renata and their son were already on their way. So at noon on Saturday the 26th, Gene was outside urinating when he heard a car door close. He ran inside and put his gun in his waistband and extra ammunition in his pockets. He heard Billy telling Renata to drive through the lower gate so he could close it behind them, and Gene waited behind the window curtains. He heard Billy's truck pulling in and Billy telling little Trey to stop crying. So Gene watched them walk toward the house. He told them to come in, and Renata sat Trey on the couch. Then Gene shot Billy from less than a foot away, hitting him in the right cheek. Billy collapsed, and Gene shot him again. Renata was screaming when Gene shot her in the back of her neck, and she was still moaning when he shot her again, killing her. So Gene picked up the poor little screaming Trey, put him on his knee, and strangled him with a nylon cord. He then took Trey's body to the barrel full of water and held his head under to make sure he was dead. So it wasn't too long after that when Gene heard Dennis and Sheila's car pull up outside. He walked to the living room and stood by the glass door. Then he saw Sheila walking toward the house with little Michael in her arms. 7-year-old Sylvia was walking ahead of her. Sylvia ran inside without seeing her father/grandfather. She called out for Loretta and Barbara, and then Sheila came in, wiping rain from Michael's hair because it had started to rain. But Jean just stood inside the door smiling. Sylvia was holding on to her mother's leg, and Sheila was begging him not to hurt her children. Sylvia may have seen Billy and Renata's bodies then because they were lying on the floor near the dining table. Jean shot Sheila 3 times in her face, and when Dennis heard the screaming and the gunshots, he raced in. He was able to reach for Jean's gun, but Jean was able to jerk it away, and he pulled the trigger, hitting Dennis in the head. Sheila was still gasping, and Jean shot her again at close range, killing her. Then Jean strangled the 2 children, Michael and Sylvia, and put their faces into the water barrel to make sure they were dead. He wrapped up the little tiny ones, Michael and Trey, just 1 and 2 years old, in plastic garbage bags. He covered the adults with coats and blankets where they lay, except for Sheila. He had special treatment for her. He moved her body closer to the Christmas tree, folded her arms across her chest, and then covered her up in Becky's best tablecloth.
And then that night he went to a local bar for a drink. Nothing's happened, regular time, good holiday. Then he spent the rest of the evening and the whole next day at the house where he'd killed all the people.
Yeah.
Then on December 28th, Simmons drove to a Walmart in Russellville and bought another gun. His first target was a law firm where a woman, Kathy Kendrick, who had rejected him, worked. He walked into the office where he shot and killed 24-year-old Kendrick. Then he went to an oil company office where he intended to kill the owner, Russell Taylor. Taylor was the owner of the Mini Mart, where Simmons had worked and had quit on the 18th of December. He shot and wounded Taylor before killing another person in that building, who was James Chaffin. Another employee was shot at, but missed. He then drove to the Sinclair Mini Mart, where he shot and wounded 2 more people. His final target was the Woodline Motor Freight Company, where he shot his former supervisor twice. Charles Sawrey, the company's data processing manager, and Vicki Jackson had witnessed the shooting from inside the computer room. They had dropped to the floor. Vicki was frozen with fear. Vicki had known Jean during the 2 years he had worked at the company, and he had talked to her a few times about Kathy Kendrick.
Yeah, he had this really big crush and obsession with Kathy Kendrick, who was very young and supposedly reminded him of Sheila.
Yeah.
So he was pretty obsessed about killing her as well.
Well, as he entered the office, Vicki looked at him. "Jean," she said, "don't hurt me."
Yeah, so Jean backed away and told Vicki that he wasn't going to hurt her. Then, almost like he was having this casual conversation, he asked her why she hadn't come to see him in Sinclair at his new job. Vicki said, well, she had gone there, but he wasn't there. So Jean said that he had killed the people he wanted to, and he wanted to turn himself in. So Gene Simmons was arrested and taken into custody without further incident, and he had 2 .22 caliber guns on him. And then after that, of course, they found the nightmare at his house, which was really hard for everyone that had to deal with that scene.
Oh,
As you can imagine.
I can't.
Horrific. Simmons was eventually sent to the Arkansas Hospital in Little Rock for psychiatric evaluation. He was found to be sane and capable of standing trial. He had 2 public defenders, and on May 12, 1988, he was convicted for the murders of Kathy Kendrick and James Chafin. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection. He supported this sentence and refused to appeal, and his execution date was set for June 27, 1988. So he was hoping to be executed before he'd have to go on trial for the rest of his family, but that didn't happen because of delays, and he did have to go on trial and was found guilty of those murders as well. But the initial execution date was set for June 27, 1988. But on June 6, 3 weeks before that scheduled execution, the Arkansas Church for Life filed a petition before the Arkansas Supreme Court asking for a stay. On July 11, 1988, the stay was upheld. Then, in 13 months, the court ruled that they could not intervene. In April 1990, the court issued its decision, and an execution date of June 25th was then set. Simmons was sent to his death cell on June 22nd. On the 25th, he was calm and ate his last meal at 3 p.m. At 8:48 p.m., he entered the execution chamber, and he was pronounced dead at 9:19 p.m., and his body was unclaimed by his 5 remaining relatives. Now, he wanted to be put to death and wanted it to happen quickly, and that was like unheard of.
Yeah.
You usually have your automatic appeals and all that, and he did not want that. But still, it's kind of weird that he didn't just kill himself then.
Yeah, I guess it is.
I guess he claimed because it was a .22, he was afraid he'd shoot himself and end up a vegetable.
Oh, shucks.
Yeah, poor guy. Didn't have any concerns for how any of these other people died or if they wanted to be alive at all.
Oh.
It was all about him, for sure.
Yep.
Yes. So a horrific story that maybe will make us all appreciate our Christmases with our families a little more.
Well, certainly hold my family closer to me.
Yeah.
And enjoy them.
Absolutely. It's heartbreaking that anything like this could ever happen.
Oh, it certainly is.
Yes. So as always, thank you guys for listening. We really appreciate it. We'll be back soon with another thrilling episode of True Crime Brewery. So we'll see you at the quiet end. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.